Trump has arrived in the UK. It's his first visit here since taking office, with stringent security measures in place, as thousands of people are expected to join demonstrations over the next few days to voice opposition to his policies. It was always expected to be a controversial visit, but within hours of landing, the president criticised Theresa May's approach to Brexit and warned that the trade agreement that she is seeking with the EU will make a deal with America far less likely. The remarks were made in an interview with The Sun newspaper. Mr. Trump is staying tonight at the US ambassador's residence in London. Our North America editor Jon Sopel is there with the latest.
Hugh, you'll remember just over 2 years ago, Barack Obama came to London during the whole Brexit debate and supported David Cameron's position that Britain should not leave the European Union. That brought accusations that the American president was interfering in the politics of a sovereign nation. Well, Donald Trump has done something similar tonight, only this time, far from supporting the current Prime Minister, he's done his best to undermine her position, saying if there's a soft Brexit, there may be no trade deal with America. And any which way you cut that, it is an extraordinary comment to make.
All dressed up, and Donald Trump does have somewhere to go.
Why is it so loud, bro?
Not a state visit. This is meant to be just a routine work trip for the president, accompanied by First Lady Melania. Well, you could have fooled me. The British are pulling out all the stops. This may be a country in turmoil, as the president remarked, but it still knows how to put on a show. The bands of the Welsh, Irish and Scots Guards beating retreat. And the setting for tonight's banquet was the magnificent Blenheim Palace, Winston Churchill's birthplace and a hero of Donald Trump's. Theresa May and husband Philip waited patiently to greet them. When the turmoil of Brexit is finally over, this is the man who she might be concluding a trade deal with. And the Prime Minister wants to make him feel welcome. A feeling not universally shared. At the gates of Blenheim, protesters gathered to make clear their displeasure at Donald Trump's visit. Although this is Middle England, and it was all a bit sedate. But tomorrow will be bigger, when the Trump baby blimp will fly 30 metres above the Thames. And protesters have promised to make their voices heard. Not that Donald Trump, before he left the NATO summit in Brussels, seemed overly worried.
Protests, there might be protests, but I believe that the people in the UK, Scotland, Ireland, as you know, I have property in Ireland, I have property all over. I think that those people, they like me a lot. And they agree with me on immigration. I'm going to a few hotspots. We have NATO, then we have the UK, and then we have Putin. And I said, Putin may be the easiest of them all. You never know. But I'm going to a pretty hot spot right now, right? With a lot of resignations.
Any US presidential visit is an exercise in the projection of power. And though protesters won't get anywhere near him, there are plenty who support Donald Trump being given the red carpet treatment as Britain's most important ally.
I think Donald Trump will have wonderful and fruitful conversations with the Prime Minister, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's president or who's Prime Minister. The long-standing relationship between our two countries will endure.
When President Trump arrived into Britain today, he was greeted on behalf of the government by Dr. Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary, underlining again the importance of trade, the preeminent issue on Theresa May's agenda. But there are signs tonight that Donald Trump, far from coming to her aid, is doing his best to undermine the fragile truce she reached with her divided cabinet last Friday. Jon Sopel, BBC News, Central London.
Well, as we've heard, President Trump has been having dinner at Blenheim Palace this evening with the Prime Minister and with a group of business leaders. And as our correspondent Duncan Kennedy reports, there were hundreds of protesters outside voicing their opposition to some of President Trump's policies.
The chant, normally reserved for British politicians, tonight turned on the President of the United States. Up to 1,000 protesters gathered outside the front of Blenheim Palace, calling for Donald Trump to leave Britain on the day he had just arrived.
Very beautiful, very nice, all these people.
There was a pantomime atmosphere playing out in the genteel Oxfordshire countryside, but with a defined edge turned on Mr Trump's presence.
I think this is against misogyny and racism, but I am against his politics generally.
And the problem is, the man with the policies has absolutely awful policies that are only out to, well, really better himself.
The president may have had his orchestra inside, but the protesters came organised as well. And although one or two tried to slip beyond the reach of the huge security presence here, it stayed peaceful and passionate.
Well, many of these people here have been waiting 6 or 7 hours for the arrival of Donald Trump. They know they're unlikely to see him, and he's unlikely to see them. What they want to do here is vocalise their anger and their frustration at the president's visit.
But even in the midst of this, Donald Trump had a few supporters.
I've come to show solidarity and support to our closest ally and Donald Trump, and to show that he's very, very welcome.
This protest was ageless, diverse and energised. There'll be an even bigger one in London tomorrow. It won't be face to face with the president, but the message remains: we just don't see eye to eye. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, at the gates of Blenheim Palace.
Well, let's go back to John Sopel once again, our North America editor, who's at the US Ambassador's residence in Regent's Park in London. John, can we pick up once again on the remarks the President made about Theresa May's Brexit strategy? Because even by Mr Trump's outspoken standards, they're quite remarkable.
Well, I mean, fancy coming to visit the nation, your closest ally, and what you do is you say something which in effect contradicts the Prime Minister's own position and seems to side with that of Boris Johnson. Let me just give you a flavour of some of what Donald Trump has said in this Sun interview. And forgive me if I start reading from the paper, but he says, well, if they do a deal like that, we would be dealing with the European Union instead of dealing with the UK. So it will probably kill the deal. If they do that, their trade deal with the US will probably not be made. And then Donald Trump talks about the way that Theresa May has handled the Brexit negotiations. And he said, I would have done it much differently. I actually told Theresa May how to do it, but she didn't agree. She didn't listen to me. So strong criticism there that she ignored the advice of the US President. Now, 2 years ago, when Barack Obama made his comments in support of Britain staying in the European Union, the Brexiteer said he should mind his own business, he should stay out of the debate, it was nothing to do with him. I wonder what those same people will be saying tonight, as Donald Trump seems to have entered a debate that is driving the Conservative Party in two, and he has firmly aligned himself with those who support a hard Brexit. I wonder whether they'll be telling the President he should mind his own business.
John, thanks very much again. John Sopel there with the latest for us at the US Ambassador's residence in London. Well, as John was saying there, President Trump, of course, casting doubt on Theresa May's approach to Brexit, suggesting it might not be the best way to negotiate with the EU. He spoke on the day the government published its long-awaited plans for future relations with the EU, and the blueprint expands on last Friday's Chequers Agreement. If we remember, that provoked the resignations of 2 cabinet ministers. The document focuses on goods and on services and on immigration. The new Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab said that this white paper was ambitious and pragmatic. Other people say it will be a bad deal for Britain. Our political editor Laura Gunsberg has been studying the contents.
Every now and then, in boring brown-looking boxes, are government documents that really, really matter. In there, Theresa May's plan for life outside the EU.
We've just come out of this morning's briefing. The document has been kept so tightly under wraps that we haven't actually been allowed to bring it out of the building. The white paper does in detail spell out a much closer relationship with the rest of the EU after Brexit than many Brexiteers had hoped for. But from the Prime Minister's point of view, it's time to compromise and accept we can't have it all.
The 98-page document spells out a common rule book for manufacturing. The UK will follow EU rules to avoid a hard border in Ireland. But the government isn't aiming for one big agreement on services, but new arrangements instead, to cover the vast majority of the economy. The overall deal will be policed by a new governing body. The European Court won't have the final say, but will interpret the rules. And while the government will end unlimited immigration from the EU, its citizens will be able to come without visas to do paid work in some circumstances, not yet defined. For those who like dramatic breaks with the established order, guess who? It's not as much of a separation as Brexit might have been. Before ministers had a chance to explain their plan, President Trump tried to do it for them.
I've been reading a lot about Brexit over the last couple of days, and it seems to be turning a little bit differently, where they're getting at least partially involved back with the European Union. I don't know if that's what they voted for.
Awkward, given that the Prime Minister was leaving for home to welcome the American President on his visit to the UK.
They voted for us to take back control of our money, our law and our borders, and that's exactly what we will do. We will stop sending vast contributions to the EU every year. We will ensure that the European Court of Justice doesn't have jurisdiction in the UK any longer, and we will ensure that we bring an end to free movement.
The white paper should have been made available. It will be immediately.
But the brand new Brexit Secretary had some problems explaining at home.
As soon as it's practically possible.
Only at the very last minute did MPs see the plan. Boxes rushed into the Commons, copies being flung around. There was such a ruckus that the session was stopped.
I will therefore